For many of us, our work identities are central to who we are. And many people are seeking out these identities. We watch students go to universities to figure out who they are and to get jobs that ultimately consumes a large portion of their time on this planet. My thoughts on this is that you enter tattooing very differently than many other jobs. When we go to school and things like that, formal education, credentialism, those become the markers of how we evaluate people and compare them next to one another. And we often have very outwardly public forms of promotion in which people's titles change. So they get a new job and they get a new title, and it comes with different freedoms and rewards and so forth. Tattooing's a little bit different in that there aren't really any systems that guide it. There's very few laws and regulations. And if there are, they're usually not enforced. So tattooers have a lot of freedom to do what they do. They rely on a kind of code of tradition and honor that guides the occupation. And this cultural code is far more important than, say, professional codes we see in other jobs or professions aligning with the state, like doctors or nurses would do. So what you have in the tattoo world, at least historically in the United States, are huge racial divisions. You know, there might be some people that are sort of token minorities in tattooing, but largely it was controlled by white men. If you look at the documents produced in tattooing, the books and so forth, largely white men. The tattoo museums controlled by white men. They control these histories. Now, I'm not blaming white men as being evil or something like this. What I am trying to say is what gets documented and who gets included in which art worlds. When I interviewed tattooers across Baltimore, that's a city that's like 60 or 70% Black. And yet what I saw were all white faces around me, the occasional Hispanic tattooer. And then eventually I found some Black tattooers. And the basic story that all of them tell me is something quite similar. Well, these Black tattooers are marginalized within tattooing, in part because they're in a location in the city where their clientele are coming in with different aesthetic decisions and financial limitations. How does this relate back to race now? We're talking about clientele that are suffering from the historical practices of residential segregation, redlining, access to jobs, and so forth that inhibit the generation of wealth or the transfer of intergenerational wealth over time. Hence, we're talking about Black poverty. So it's an aesthetic that's reproducing an urban Black body that's marginalized. And then when these tattooers go into white shops trying to ask for jobs, their whole portfolio of work is the kinds of things their clients can afford. But the kinds of things their clients can afford are not appreciated by those white tattooers that are focused on specific art aesthetics. Tattooing's become far more accessible now than it ever was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I think it was either 2004 or 2005 was the first reality television show on it. And that put tattooing in people's living rooms. And now when we have it on the internet and so forth, people don't have to go further than Instagram to see tattooed bodies.
It's become just more and more mainstream, since I started. And it's just more and more acceptable, and it's been embraced by popular culture, by commercial culture, corporate culture, you name it. Tattooing's everywhere.
Versus 30 or 40 years ago, to get involved in it and find a tattooer, you had to go find a shop, and then you had to go talk to people, and they might not be friendly because they're busy with their work. They're drawing designs or they're tattooing, and it might not be the most pleasurable experience if you don't know how to talk to people or walk into a tattoo shop. But the reality is it was a bit harder to get into it because you had to go to some place in town where you didn't know how people were going to treat you. Now with the internet, it's very easy to check out people's designs and be like, hey, I like this. When are you free? It's a very different process of going into a shop and finding people.
Yeah, social media is part of it. I think social media has kind of replaced traditional media as far as it used to be. You looked at tattoo magazines and what was being published in those, but now, everybody's their own publisher. Now it's tattooers have more control over what they put out there. Social media is a tool for our business, and I guess everybody's businesses these days.
But a lot of the tattooers were complaining about the internet in the sense that they would lose a degree of autonomy and control over producing designs. And I remember one tattooer telling me this, that somebody came in with an image of Elvis, but they had Googled the same Elvis that everyone else did. Collectively, as an occupation, members of tattooing are grappling with a lot of change. And this has been very good for tattooing. And it's change brought about by increased attention, by Instagram, the television shows, and so forth. On the one hand, now all these potential consumers are coming around. But it's also led to a lot of problems for tattooers to a certain degree, because now they have more people coming around asking questions to interrupt their jobs. It's nice to be able to sit behind the counter and not talk to people and focus on your work. Now you've got to stop and be nice to them and polite and do the face work. And well, all of a sudden that interrupts your focus on doing this other activity over here. So it's a good thing, but it also has kind of exposed a world that stayed hidden for a long time. And in talking to tattooers, I would say everyone I interviewed, while they appreciated the increased attention to their jobs, they also resented it, because it meant that they lost some of the control over who they were and what their narrative was. That, media agencies or Instagram are now posting things about people, and it's not necessarily the way that tattooers intended to frame it. So it wasn't as influential as it is now. I mean, we didn't have, Justin Bieber going on there showing off his tattoos, and then a bunch of followers thinking, oh, I can get tattooed like that too. The thing that really gets me, though, and this does concern me, is that many of these people that are involved in popular culture, they have the status, the wealth, and the resources that they can afford the consequences of being heavily tattooed. That for many of us, there are going to be very stringent consequences on our careers and our identities as we move forward. So it's a very different cultural world in which we're seeing many more of these images. It's not just the Instagram thing. It's that we're seeing it across many different arenas. And sort of ultimately, at the end, we get to this sort of question about labor and capitalism, of have tattooers, because they don't have professional associations and they're not like many other occupations, have they found a way to survive that other jobs haven't? That's provided a bit more humanism to their labor, that's allowed them to not necessarily escape, but sort of avoid some of the pitfalls that other jobs have had in capitalism that have led to alienation or dehumanization, or the de-skilling of their labor. The reality is we all got to eat and survive in a system that we didn't ask to be part of. And it's a system that really does take a lot out of our labor and our humanity. So how do we do that? And can tattooing maybe provide us with a roadmap to make this system a bit better for the rest of us? And I'm not saying tattooing's perfect, but they don't have aspects of labor that other jobs have that are so dehumanized.